Thank you, Tom, for that introduction. And again, thanks to Tom and Lorraine, two of our parishioners, and others who, by the grace of the Holy Spirit, kind of nurtured this idea of stories of grace. That is, amongst us, all of us, you have a story to tell. And so I've been blessed to listen to many of those stories and thank those members of our parish who have shared in the past. And so sharing a little bit of my own story tonight, I have to admit I just was feeling a lot of trepidation. I don't necessarily want to talk about myself. I don't know what it is. It's easier to preach a homily, throw out a bunch of words than having to do too much self-revelation. But I'm going to try to, first of all, give you an overview of my life, just a kind of a framework, and then maybe a little bit the vocation story. And so I told myself I would turn on my little clock so I don't get carried away here and keep you up till 12. So at any rate, preliminary sketch. My parents are of German-Russian descent. They grew up, my great-great-grandparents, in the region of Odessa, currently Ukraine, where there's such tragedy and war. Grew up in big families near Strasburg, North Dakota. Mom had 11 children. In her 11 siblings, she was one of 11, second oldest. Dad was one of 14, 12 boys, 2 girls. And he was one of the younger children. So when it came to getting in touch with relatives and family through the years, Mom's side, she was more the matriarch, we'd be going back to the homestead. And that was our idea of a vacation, visiting our uncle's farm, chasing pigs, bringing in the cows, picking up the chicken eggs, butchering chickens, pulling off the feathers, snaring gophers, all that fun stuff on the farm. That was our vacation. In our family, there were 6 children. There were 2 girls, oldest, Mary and Kathy, then my brother Don, then me, and then Myron and Daryl, the youngest. And early days of our family kind of moved with my dad's work of construction. He worked with operating engineer equipment to move earth moving and whatnot. So I was born during the years of the Wahi Dam down in South Dakota on the Missouri River. He worked on that, and I was born in Fort Pierre, South Dakota. And then later on moved to Lakota around the year 64, I believe, or so, where he worked in the missile site construction of the ICBMs, the silos. My parents had purchased an 8x40 trailer, and I looked up some of the RVs. There are RVs that are 50 feet long these days, but we had an 8-foot wide trailer by 40. Back room, bedroom, middle bedroom with bunks, a little kind of a kitchen, and then a little front living room, so to speak, which was a bedroom because we had a hideaway bed. And so that was our trailer house with 5 children. The youngest wasn't born until Jamestown. But anyway, I graduated in 1976 from Jamestown High School, after which I went to UND with a plan to take up accounting. After a semester living in student resident halls in Smith Hall, not after Tom Smith, but I moved into the men's fraternity, Lambda Chi Alpha, and got into the party scene of college life. So I'll come back to that later. Now, my journey of faith began in my earliest memories back in the 61. I was probably 3, 4, going to church in Fort Pierre. I don't remember the name of the church, but that name that Mother would say, Father O'Doherty, Irish Father O'Doherty was a name that I would remember. Scant memory also of a large space, and you saw the figurines up front, as well as people coming up and kneeling and then getting up and back. So they had the kneelers back in that time, in 1960 still. People would come up and receive kneeling and then go back and change places. All of that I remember vaguely. For those of you who remember the Terminator movies, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Skynet, this computer kind of world, and when all of a sudden the computer became self-aware. Well, I like to look back because this was a fond, interesting memory. My first memories of that becoming aware of myself was in waking up from a nap in the back of the trailer house, Mom and Dad's bedroom, and I was waking up on their bed, and I was aware. I looked in the mirror and said, why am I me? That's my first memory of self-awareness. Like, why am I me? Why am I in this body? Those are some distinct questions I kind of remember asking. In other words, who am I? From there, of course, our knowledge of ourselves is always growing, becoming more aware that we are children of God, His beloved children, sons and daughters. But that's something we ought to grow into our whole life, understanding that awareness. When our family moved to Lakota after the Oahe Dam was finished, again, 1964 or so, my oldest sister, Mary, became involved in music ministry at St. Mary's Church, and the priest there befriended our family, Father Wisniewski. I remember he had our family over one night, visited. He kind of kept rabbits and pet rabbits, so we remember those. Gave my sister a guitar, and because she played music ministry, and somehow he attracted me. So it was like the beginning of that planting of the seed of my vocation, you might say, because very soon afterwards, in that first grade, I remember our first grade teacher asked us to draw a picture of what we wanted to be when we grew up. And you can imagine first graders putting down the normal things we might have known back then. There was nurses, doctors, policemen, firemen, a nuclear physics engineer. Well, maybe not that one. Well, I drew a picture of a small little building, and I think I had a little cross on the steeple somehow. I put a point, and then a little stick person, and that Mrs. Stein, our first grade teacher, said, "Well, what's this?" And I said, "That's a priest." "Oh," she said, and she moved on. I was like, okay, kind of an awkward moment for her too, I guess. As it turned out, I met her when I was a priest in Devil's Lake, my first assignment. She was the mother of one of the parishioners there, and she was dying at that time, and she remembered me, I think, so it was interesting. Nonetheless, that was my first kind of planting of the seed. I remember preparing for First Communion, like many of us do. My mother was sitting me down for the Baltimore Catechism. I was an impatient child, distracted always, because I remember having to be scolded and stern, pay attention many times. Nonetheless, from there, the day of my First Communion arrived. Sorry to say there weren't any bells or bright lights going off. When I received our Lord for the first time, I was more curious about what the host would taste like, since my older brother said it was like cardboard. And also to be careful not to let it get stuck in the roof of your mouth. So I'm conscious of not doing that. I say that in jest, but I do remember holding on to the rosary and my prayer book, which I still have, received of my First Communion. It was a special day, all dressed up and very special, so I remember that very well. In the fall of 1965, my dad suffered a tragic accident when the dump truck that he was driving collided with another truck. And it ended up breaking both of his legs, and he was taken to a hospital in Grand Forks. We lived in Lakota still. And I remember the trauma surrounding that event, just how it is. Your sisters were serious, and we're just kids trying to, what's going on? And nonetheless, 3 days later, I was going off to school. I hopped on my bike. I don't know if I had breakfast much. I think Mom was still distraught. And nonetheless, I hopped on my bike, zipping off to school, and I was run over by a pickup truck. So I still remember the images of the front grill of that old truck bearing down on me, and some kind of scraping feeling, like my head was going like this or something. I remember that. And then the next thing I knew, I was being pulled out from underneath. I was still conscious, from underneath the truck, the back wheels, and they brought me into some place. I think it was like a cheese factory. It stunk. I remember that stink. And then all of a sudden they took me into an ambulance, and Mom was there, and she's crying all the way to Devil's Lake. We didn't go to Grand Forks. It was closer to Devil's Lake. And then they had to shave. And all I had out of the whole ordeal was a little skull fracture. You can see the scar there, and then some loose marbles, which I haven't straightened out since then. But that was it, other than a few bruises. It was really a blessing by God, my guardian angel. I wasn't hurt beyond that little skull fracture. So you can imagine my mother, must have really been difficult for her. But she pulled us through. And when my dad was brought back from the hospital, I stayed about a week down there. And then my dad came back from Grand Forks in a full kind of cast. And so we had to clean out that middle room with the bunk beds and made something for him to raise himself up and down. And we'd gather in that little room. It wasn't very big, 8 feet by about 9, 10 feet, I don't know. All 6 of us, or 7, and we'd be praying the rosary every night. So Again, those are memories that, however God takes the events of our lives and works through them in His providence, all things work to the good for those who love God. Even those tragedies in that time in our family's history, all things work to the good for those who love God. And so somehow that was building faith where who knows where our family might have continued to drift or whatnot. We always went to church. We were pretty serious, but this was something different now. Well, I came out of that, as they say, accident. Moving to Jamestown in 1966, my dad recovered and we moved there and still in the trailer house for a little bit, but then moved into a house. We went to Jamestown, St. John's Academy, Catholic school for the first time. And I certainly remember my teachers, Sister Mary Jewell, feisty nun. One time one of the little kids was a bully and she said, "So you want to fight? Fight me." And so can you imagine a nun with a little habit back then wrestling this kid in the front of all the other classmates? That was Sister Mary Jewell, but she was feisty, and we all knew she loved us. But so the fifth grade, I remember Mrs. Zimney. She had piqued my interest in biblical theology because she talked about the Exodus and some of the natural things that happened around that place in Egypt that might have been considered the miracles. Well, they were miracles. God just took the natural events and kind of extrapolated them, made them much more huge. At least that's how she explained it to me, and I kind of grasped that. Anyway, I started serving Mass in the fourth grade, kept it up through the years. On one occasion in high school, it was a summer day, they needed help serving. So I remember just going to the back of the sacristy and suiting up. And then towards the end of the Mass, somehow I was standing in the sanctuary, the priest, and we were, I think, on either side of him back then as servers on that Sunday. And it was a summer day. The doors were open in the back of the church. And I remember gazing out. And I just recall this distinct impression, which I couldn't even put into words today. Just something stirring in my heart that, again, I can't articulate. Just like a sense of, what is this? And that's all I could say about it. It was something that God had a moment there with me just to begin to do something. So from there, my junior and senior year in high school, those high school years were normal as any other student. My brothers and I were quite involved in individual sports, golf, tennis, a lot. I followed my brother delivering paper route after school. So 7th through 9th grade, kept busy with that and individual sports. And so it kept me from team sports. I never really entered anything. And my mother did put a clarinet in my hands when I was in the 8th grade and said, "This is your sister's, you're going to be in band." And so for 2 years, I sat there and pretended. That was torture. I never practiced, and anyway, that was a long story. But, and then when I was a sophomore, I went from paper route to grocery store, clerk, courtesy boy, working again, so didn't again get involved in a lot of school activities or other extracurricular activities, but I chummed around with a buddy from the 6th grade, Dick Lefevre, and David Prentice, two buddies. The three of us were chums through all of grade school, high school, not grade school, but high school, and kept close and talked about all the girls we liked and dating and all that. But I had an eye for girls from the 6th grade on. In fact, when I was in 6th grade, I used to follow this girl home to see where she lived. What do you call that? Voyeur, I don't know. God have mercy. But I did that, but was very shy, mile-long shy streak. Asking a girl to dance in senior high was like trying to move a mountain. A couple times I tried, but didn't get anywhere. So I did finally have a short romance, so to speak, infatuation with a sophomore that last month and then into the summer of my senior year in high school, where back in college, that didn't last, of course, but where dating in college, though, didn't fare much better. As I shared earlier at the beginning, my first year in college was moving into a fraternity, heavy on the party side. I got scared out of my wits, though, because I moved in within the 3rd week of college into that fraternity, and then that night, the guy who I was roommate with crawls in the window, drunk, And it scared me so bad I moved right back to the resident hall. And then after another first semester of my freshman year, then I moved into the fraternity the second semester of my freshman year. I remember my dad and my uncle brought me up there, and they couldn't believe, like, is this where you're going to live? And, you know, a party place and not very well cleaned up. But anyway, that was... okay, so what happened? I continued to go to Mass and college at the UND Newman Center. At Christmas, my mother, my freshman year in college, bought me this book called My Daily Bread. It was basically St. Thomas à Kempis, The Devout Life. No, that was Francis de Sales, Imitation of Christ, The Imitation of Christ. And I would read that book off and on that freshman year, my second semester, that is, January, February. One Sunday, in fact, there was at the Newman Center a visiting priest who gave a talk on vocations. And it happened to be parent visitation weekend. My mom and dad were up. And hearing that talk and similar talks along the way like it, once or twice I remember in high school, there was this interplay going on in my mind, kind of an unexplainable attraction, and yeah, I'm supposed to do that, to a cool rationalization, a denial. No, that can't be for me. Well, I even thought of being an FBI agent because I was intrigued by James Bond. And so FBI, you had to be an accountant, you know, to get a 4 years. So that's how I got into UND to begin with, thinking of going into accounting. In fact, I'd even visited Cardinal Mensch Seminary as a sophomore in high school. About 40 of us altar servers and Columbian squires, kind of a subgroup of the Knights of Columbus, a young men's group. We went to visit Cardinal Mensch, but there again, even though something attracted me that I should be here, I said, well, they're all freshmen already. They started it. I'm a year behind. It's not for me. Kind of rationalizing it away. Well, anyway, back to college that first year, freshman. Late in the spring of my freshman college year, I was becoming more and more unsettled in the party life that I was engaged in, and seriously began to wonder how I would find a wife in the midst of many of the young women hanging around at our parties. Of course, I wasn't looking in the mirror and realizing, well, who are you to speak, right? You know, I'm here partying. But anyway, back in Jamestown that summer of my first year of college, after that, lived at home. And my confusion and my growing anxiousness of my wandering life led me to a moment where I distinctly remember begging the Lord to please help me. Now there were two other times. Once in college, that freshman year, we were coming back, well, I won't go to the details, but I ended up outside the Newman Center, leaving a hockey game early, just kind of crying, God help me. And then that summer, I'm at some party in Woodworth, North Dakota. I forget the name of the town now. But this outdoor party and all these people, college and young men, and, they were a party crowd. And I just felt so out of place. And I remember wandering off and just laying out in the grass, looking up in the heavens and trying to talk to God. There was a peace there, a peace that helped give me hope because I was afraid being there. And anyway, I made it home that night, and then later on this third episode, I'm in the house and I'm in my room, and I'm literally just afraid and almost saying, God, please help me. And I guess, as I understand it, God really did answer my prayer that third time. I guess, of course, he was always answering my prayers. Believe me, his providence was always at work every moment, every second of my life. But somehow I was ready to let him in and serious about it. And I remember as things began to change, shortly thereafter, as I would read that Imitation of Christ, they would come out alive at me, the words. And prayer had meaning, and it was exciting. Going to church. In fact, I think that month I'd go to church twice. I'd go to church on Saturday night and again Sunday morning. And then I remember going back to the Newmans, to the fraternity. Now it's my second year of college, sophomore, and I continued to live in the Newmans, not the Newman Center, I'm sorry, at the fraternity, Lambda Chi. But got involved at the Newman Center. I'd go to daily mass often, and I got involved helping to do catechesis on a Sunday morning with the little children. This young woman, a college student, was the teacher, and I assisted her and was really drawn to her beauty and her faith. So that kind of began to draw me away from the university. So you can imagine the tension, living in a fraternity, a party life at times, but yet so they started to call me out, like, what's going on? You becoming a Jesus freak? Or, what are you doing? And so I knew that something had to give. And so at Christmas time, I just said, I can't go back. Mom said, you don't have to. I stayed home, and mind you, none of this was easy. While I'm at college, it's like, the toilet seat up and down, and excited about my faith, but also fearful. How do I change? Then when I stayed at home, and I didn't have a job right away. Construction didn't start until the summer, and so my mom, knowing that I needed help, signed me up for some adult ed classes in the evening, car mechanics and woodworking, I don't know, some different things. But again, there's a distinct moment I remember. It was Lent, and we were doing Stations of the Cross, and I said, God, this is heavy, Lord. This is going to be a heavy life. That trudging through the darker times. We all, I think, probably have those kinds of episodes on the journey at times. Nonetheless, later that winter into the spring, I got involved in a charismatic prayer group at St. James St. James Basilica there. It wasn't a basilica back then yet. And from there, met one of the young men in there, Richard Weigang, who himself was going to be going to the seminary at Cardinal Mensch that fall. Well, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wasn't really saying yes to priesthood, so I called up the Newman Center. I heard that they were starting a new program called Peer Ministers, college students living at the Newman Center, reaching out to other students. And so they accepted me, and so I was one of the first peer ministers, me and Rhea Benning. She was helping reach out to the women, and I was with the guys. And, it was nice, exciting, but I was still looking into accounting and studying all of that. Then what happened was I went going home to Jamestown on the weekend to see Mom, and I passed through Fargo to visit Rich at the seminary. It turned out to be a closed weekend, and all the doors were supposed to be locked, but I walked in, and Monsignor, back then, Father Val Gross, who was the rector of the seminary, said, what do you do? How'd you get in? The door was, well, come on in, have a conversation. So after an hour or so of talking, I left there with peace. I knew I was going to come to the priesthood next year. I was going to sign up. I had something lifted in me, and I was excited. I was going to be a priest. And that was real and tangible. And I just remember the joy. It's like, cloud nine, and you're floating away. And now there's a couple obstacles, though. Two things. One, at that point, was academic record was less than stellar, and I really like women, But I'd never had any kind of a serious relationship, as I shared with you, being so shy, and wondered if my shyness was turning me away too quickly from something that I longed to do. I wanted to be married. I loved children. My sisters had kids and nieces and nephews, and I just thought, how do I say no to this? And I've never had a chance to say yes to it. Am I just running away? So that was a concern for me that summer. Well, first obstacle took care of itself from taking courses like business law, economic statistics, cost accounting, and other, which I was just getting C's if at best. I turned to like philosophy. There was an Old Testament prophets class. Father Potter taught writings of St. Paul, and another course on prayer, and psychology. My courses shot up significantly, and I loved what I was studying. For once, I really wanted to study. And so that kind of settled that obstacle that I can do this. My mother never had a lot of encouragement. She didn't think I could handle the studies, but by God's grace, I was meant to be there. And Dad always wondered about, you gotta be careful with girls. You can't. So he was concerned whether I was too much of a girl-minded. But, well, as I said, I'd never had that opportunity to have a real serious relationship. So there too, the second obstacle, that summer, things changed. Somehow, knowing that I wanted to be sure of this, God gave me some kind of boldness, and I remember dating a couple of young ladies, and didn't come anything of that. And then I was at a restaurant in Jamestown with my Rich Weigang that summer, and caught this eye of this young lady, and I saw her a couple nights later at in fact, I looked her up in the annual when I got home, saw her at the 4th of July fair in Jamestown, and I just couldn't stop looking at her. You just gaze at someone, you don't turn away. I never would have did that my whole life long in high school, look at somebody and not turn away in college. But it did, and so here she comes then with her friends, coming our way, because she knows I'm looking at her and she's looking back, smiling, and then her friend stopped and said, because she knew me, and this is Darcy, because I couldn't move, I was frozen. So her friend intervened, again, the guardian angel, the providence of God. Next thing I know, we started talking. We went to see where she worked at the restaurant a couple days later, and had a date lined up. And so for the next 2 months, we dated. She knew I was going to the seminary. She knew that I was looking at the priesthood. But yet we, at some point within that relationship, we talked, could we ever see ourselves getting married? And she said, yeah, I could see this growing into that kind of a relationship. She wasn't Catholic, she was a Protestant. We talked about religion somewhat, and differences of interpretation in the Bible and things like that a bit, but we had a really good relationship. And what kind of clinched it then was the night she took me over to her mother's house, and she said, I want to play a song for you I wrote, kind of piano piece. So she had me over there, and she started playing this piano piece, and I'm listening to this, and I distinctly remember, how is this beautiful woman, how much I would love to be married and would spend a life with her, but, and I just knew that something was drawing me to God. I couldn't again articulate that in words other than, in my mind, it's not going to be. Those are the words, it's not going to be. So she's done with this beautiful song, and she turns to me, and I talk about punching the gut, said, gee, that was beautiful, thank you, but I don't think I'm called to marriage, So, you mean I just played this song for you and you don't? Anyway, now you have to know that in priesthood there's always a kind of a dying, a mourning, that possibility of marriage, of having a relationship with a woman, a wife for your life. At least that's how I learned it through my priest support group, that there's a mourning. And I remember telling this to a nun about 7 years ago. I went on a retreat out in Boston. Mother Olga, the Daughters of Nazareth, she was from Iraq. She was part of it. Well, I won't get into her whole history in Iraq with Saddam Hussein, but she offered the retreat, and I ended up telling her this story that I just told you about that young lady that I had dated. And when I got to the part about telling this story about the piano piece, I just broke down and cried. I just remember, even now, when you think of it, it was just very powerful. And it's like mourning. There's a sense of, okay, because marriage is a beautiful, wonderful thing, but I just wasn't called. And a second time, I remember I think my second year of priesthood, I was in Devil's Lake with Father Haas, and maybe it was first year, I'm not sure, but my aunt, my mom's sister in Denver, I had visited there with Rich Weigang that very summer. This is one of those serendipity things, God knows what he's doing, because Darcy, my girlfriend, we're 2 months now before that summer, before I did the seminary. She said, 2 weeks before I'm about to leave to the seminary, she said, my sister is going to Minneapolis. When you come along on a trip with us. And, but Rich said, will you come with me back to Denver and help me with this car that he bought, and we're going to repaint it. And so I went with Rich, and by providence, that's probably the wiser thing, because had I went with her to Minneapolis, I don't know where that would have went. At any rate, I go to Denver, and I meet my aunt and my other cousins. A couple of them are my age, a little older, one of them. And so then when I'm ordained a priest, I came and spent time. I had a ticket. I went to Denver, spent a week with my aunt and my cousins. And I remember the morning that I had to come back, again, I cried almost uncontrollably, because I had this wonderful time with my cousin, and being a beautiful woman, and I just realized there's a mourning, a letting go, and that's okay. Crying over losses in any form that they take in our life is okay. Bringing it to God and give me strength, Lord. And to this day, that's my journey. So I'm not going to go on any further about the rest of the journey as far as priesthood goes. I served in Devil's Lake 4 years. Wonderful assignment. A lot of growing. Then in the Newman Center, where I was associate for 2 years with Father Ermer, and then 6 years as a pastor. Wonderful assignment again. Loved working with the college students. A lot of growing up to do. I look back and then you get all the mistakes you make, but that's God's hands. Leave it to God and can't beat yourself up forever. And at any rate, we had a big fire and flood my last year at the Newman Center. First there was a fire that burned the sanctuary. Then 2 months later or 3 months later, there's a big flood that came out. And so I always say the fire came in one door and the flood the other, and I went out the back door. Bishop assigned me over to St. Catherine's in Valley City. Father Courtwright then became the pastor at the Newman Center, and he helped to rebuild the church at that time. So then at Valley City, wonderful assignment. I loved it there, 7 years. It was a nice parish, one Parish town. You get to know the people and the other faith communities, and that was a great assignment. And then from there, I was called to become pastor at St. Michael's in Grand Forks. And so I was there 17 years. That was challenging. The first few years were very, very difficult. Again, a big learning curve, big administration of a big parish, and a lot of mistakes, but God's grace, and you keep learning and growing. To where then 3 years ago, 3.5 years, the bishop called and said, it's time. You've been there 17 years, and I'd like you to come to St. Anthony's. And I said, okay. And so I'm here in this wonderful community, and I'm glad to be with you all. And thank you for your support, your prayers, and all that you do to help St. Anthony's to grow and to be a community of faith and help nurture others in that journey. So that's it. I think we're going to call it goods for that. So no questions and answers, though. So.